You're listening to Northwoods Church Matters, a podcast of Northwoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, where we discuss why the local church matters and things that matter to the local church. I'm your host, Matt Higgins. On today's episode, we're going to discuss church budgeting. How does a church come up with a budget? And how do finances really work in a local church? And how do pastors get paid anyway? All this and more on today's episode of Northwoods Church Matters. All right, well, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with our lead pastor, Bobby Pell, and I think today we've got the job of turning water into wine, which is that we're trying to make a podcast on budgeting scintillating.
It will be.
It will be. Ooh, baby. It's going to be the most thrilling, 15, 20 minutes you've ever heard in your life. So
this will take an hour.
Awesome. Well, speaking of scintillating, let's start off with a quote here. Joe Biden once said, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value." So all politics aside, for real, do you agree with the content of that quote?
I don't know that I have ever agreed with a Joe Biden comment in my life, but yes, that is true. I think that it's clearly true that our budgets, the way we spend our money reveals what we value. There's an old statement that says that if I could show you where I spend my money and where I spend my time, that those are the things that will reveal a person's life, what they care about in their life and their heart. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2 says, "It's required of stewards that they be found faithful." I'm a steward of the things that God's given me, and that includes my money and my time.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you do counseling with married couples, which we've both done on multiple occasions. When people fight about money, they're really not fighting about money. They're fighting about values and what they value, which is why those things are really hard to fix when it's a money problem in a marriage, because you have two people with two views of the world and what is important and what is not important. And it's really when a couple gets aligned to Christ that things get fixed, because you start valuing the same things. So how is a church budget different from a home budget?
I think it's more complicated. I think that the basics are still there. The basics are that you have to determine, because a budget basically is a spending plan. And a home budget is a spending plan. A church budget is a spending plan. In both cases, the money is not ours. Mm-hmm. And so because the money is not ours, we are basically creating a spending plan of what God's money is and where we should be using it. And so to that degree, I think it's the same. Where it's a little different is I think it gets more complicated. It's more complicated because there's, you have different ministries. You have sometimes what people think are competing ministries. They're not. Hopefully all of our ministries are for the purpose of making disciples who make disciples. And so I think that there are more similarities than there are differences.
I agree. But where I think it's interesting is I think that if you ask the average person on the street, what's the difference between a church budget and a home budget, they would say stewardship. That in a church budget, we're stewarding the resources that God has given by tithes and offerings. But that's a misunderstanding of a home budget, that regardless of the circumstance, we're stewards of what God has given us in terms of income and our possessions and things like that.
Yeah, it filters.
Yeah.
I mean, what I have, I don't have. What the church has, they don't have. I mean, everything that we are doing on the basis of that we are a steward of what the Lord is allowing to come through our fingers in order to accomplish His will.
Yeah, there's a worship song by Matt Redman, which the lyrics of the song are, "We're breathing the breath that you gave us to breathe to worship you." Mm-hmm. That everything that we have is on loan to us from God. And we should certainly view money that way.
That's good.
Why are church budget meetings so notorious for being awful? I mean, they're not here at Northwoods. We have good process, but you ask an average person, would you rather go to the dentist and have your teeth drilled or go to a church budget meeting? Most people would say, I'd rather get my teeth drilled.
Yeah, I guess I should preface this by saying, I don't have a history in my life of seeing bad church budget meetings. I've heard about them. I know about them, and I think the root of bad church budget meetings are heart issues.
Mm.
They're heart issues about how people view money and their money and ownership of money. And when we have a right view of God's resources, I think that those awful bad budget meetings go away.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sinfulness that's at the root of those things that I think people need to realize that we all worship and serve Christ differently, which means we value things in different ministries in the church. And when it becomes a real problem is when people become too selfish about their silo of ministry, that this is the most important thing that the church is doing and it should be funded a lot. But you've got another person in the church that has a completely different view. Like, my ministry is the most important. And when we get a bigger view of what the church is and just compromising for the sake of the kingdom, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. You have I'm for Awana. I am for worship. I am for sports. I am for. Well, why can't any and all of these things, or why shouldn't all of these things be for Jesus and discipleship and seeing people come to know Christ and drawing closer to Him and making disciples? And when we start seeing that there isn't a ministry in the life of the church, there is making disciples, and that includes from utility bills to cooperative program giving. I mean, it's all a part of the same process.
Yeah, and I think if there's a conflict between programs and ministry in a church budget, we're really looking at what is serving the church's mission statement the most. I mean, our church mission statement is we're making disciples who make disciples. And so we're prioritizing programs in the church budget and valuing them that are fulfilling that mission statement. And so we're constantly looking at, okay, is this program going out and making disciples? And if it's not, then those are the programs that either get funded less or they potentially get the axe, and we don't include them at all.
Well, and this. I mean, our staff sits down every year, and not only every year, every month at the minimum, and basically ask the question: should we do that again next year?
Mm-hmm.
And that determination determines budget.
Yeah.
I mean, because if it's not effective for the sake of the kingdom, then why are we doing it?
Yeah. I mean, people are going to clutch their pearls when I say this, but I mean, there are programs on the table that people have no idea that we evaluate them every year. And we ask, should we do an Easter egg hunt this year? Should we do trunk or treat this year? And we're constantly asking, okay, how can we use these programs to make disciples more, and constantly tweaking them?
Yeah. And I think it's probably important for us to say, people expect, as we use those two as an example, they would expect that because there are large crowds that come, that's what makes them successful. But what makes an event successful is not the attendance. It's, did we make disciples who make disciples? Mission drives success. And that is what ultimately helps us to understand that's also what gets in the budget. What gets in the budget is not the crowd.
Yeah.
What gets in the budget is did we accomplish the mission of the church?
Yeah. So I'm gonna skip a question because I think that we've gotten to a question that I have on the list for a little later, which is, how is the church budget connected to the church mission statement?
Yeah, I think the way that it's connected to it is through the evaluation process. I mean, we consistently are asking those questions. I think, once again, people would be surprised to know everything that we look at through, are we really making disciples or are we not? And there are some clear pet projects that people have and pet things that are popular that people enjoy that we have seriously considered not funding because it's the mission that matters.
Yeah. And there's some wrong ways to look at a church budget. I mean, there's certain churches that do look at the popularity question. Okay, do people like this program? Well, there could be a church program that's very well liked and very well received, but it's not making disciples and not fulfilling the church mission statement, and therefore it's not a priority.
Oh, the amount of mistakes I believe that happen as it relates to church budgeting is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the issue of that the mission is simply not attached.
Mm-hmm.
You have that people budget things according to popularity. You have that in certain churches, budgets are determined as they say to people, hey, just go pray about whatever it is that God wants you to do and tell us what that is and how much money you need. That's what ends up in a budget. And because of that, please, that can be misunderstood as I don't want you to pray. But when you do that, you end up with a budget of $1 million budget and a church that brings in $300,000 or $400,000.
Right.
That's not a real budget. You would never do that in your house. I mean, that's totally unrealistic. There's also the flip of that, where people, when churches create budgets, they never pray. They never ask, what should we be doing next year? They basically create last year's budget and Xerox it for this year. There are all kinds of mistakes that I believe churches make as they make their budgets. And that can sound arrogant, like, well, we're the only ones who know. I don't believe that either. I think there's more than one way to make a budget. But I think there's some clear wrong ways to make a budget.
Yeah, and then another type of major guilt in the budget process is we've always done it this way. Mm-hmm. That phrase just ruins churches when we just go by the philosophy, this is what we've always done. We're going to keep doing that. And it's devoid of mission whenever we do that. Mm-hmm. So how do we project what our annual income will be?
First of all, we keep track of what our income is. The way we do that here is really twofold. One is in my office, there is a notebook that we have that has the average offering that is being given per year for the year. And then there is a 13-week moving average. So I can tell you what our 13-week average is. We've done that since the church started.
What are the problems with trying to project income in a church?
You don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, at any point in time, Alcoa could close. At any point in time, Toyota could close. At any point in time, some, 4 or 5 families could leave the church for no reason.
Sure. They've moved.
That's
or somebody dies.
That's right. I mean, you just don't know what's about to take place. What we've done is we've looked at our average offering, and if the church is growing, we put a percentage that we say, we're willing to move that average offering up 4 or 5, 6 or 7%. Some years we've increased it 10% over that average offering. And then that has been the freedom with which we're able to move the budget. And so then we cut things from the budget and we add things to the budget.
And it's different. This is one of the key differences from a home budget is that your home budget, I mean, if you're regularly employed, you know what your paycheck is going to be from week to week to week. In the church life, we don't necessarily know that. I mean, somebody could be on vacation and they forget to submit their offering that week, and then things are just different. And honestly, this is what drives some small church pastors and then some younger pastors just absolutely crazy and drives them out of ministry is that it takes a lot of faith, tremendous faith, to work for a church and just entrust your budget and your life in the hands of God, and then the people in your church that, there are churches where people can be mean-spirited. I know you don't believe. Shocking. But, I have heard of churches where, and been in churches where pastor makes a decision about a program or something going on in the church that's perceived to be incorrect or unpopular. And then as a result, the congregation stops giving and holds the pastor's livelihood or the church's programming hostage by their giving level. And these are some of the things that are just terrible that go on behind the scenes in churches.
And I hope as people hear this, that they're shocked.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I hope nobody's ever done that before.
That's right. I mean, I hope that as people hear this, they go, I would never think of that, because that's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're giving, you're not giving first to the church. You're giving first to God.
Yeah.
And you're giving it through the local church that is ministering to you and caring for you. Now, there is no perfect church, and no church will perfectly minister to you, and no church will perfectly care for you. But I think losing focus on who you're giving to is a major problem that creates the mindset of, well, I'm just going to hold my tithe back.
Yeah. So in American society, are people becoming more or less generous in their giving to churches and other nonprofits?
Yeah, they're becoming less generous. Yeah, some of the statistics you and I were looking up earlier are pretty discouraging.
Yeah, I mean, the average person gives 2.5% of their income to a local church. That's down since the height of actually the Great Depression, when people gave 3.3% of their income on average. And I think what's also discouraging is you look at giving statistics, richer people tend to give a lower percentage of their income, more towards like 1% instead of 2.5%. And people that are poor and have less actually give more, kind of the widow's mite story. Right. Does that encourage you or discourage you?
Yes, it does. I mean, honestly, that's both encouraging and discouraging. I mean, I can think of someone that I talked with not long ago who they said, we're going to start faithfully giving when we start making more money. And I thought to myself, did not say anything, but when I thought to myself, probably not. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get into these situations of that people have a mindset that when I make it, I'll give it. And that's a deception of the enemy.
Yeah.
Because we never make it.
Yeah.
I'm to be faithful as a steward with what I have today, because I don't know what I'm going to have tomorrow.
Yeah. And for me personally, online giving has radically transformed my life. That I became convicted a few years back that if you went through my checkbook when, you actually had a checkbook, I'd write the payment for my mortgage first. I write the car payment. I pay the utilities. And then the last check that I'd write in any given month when I'm writing out checks was to the church. Yeah. Not that I'm giving any more or less from month to month, but it's just the last check that I was writing. And it convicted me one time I was doing this. It's like, I'm saying in priority, my mortgage and my car are more important than the church. And so by having my giving auto drafted out of my checking account, it's done better for me for that. Even as a pastor, in the back of your head, if you're writing the last check as the church, you have that devilish thought process in your head. Do I really have enough for this? Should I be giving this much? What about this? And so by taking it out automatically, that takes that thought process out of that totally.
And I think a lot of people believe that, I think a lot of people believe that we as pastors don't struggle with these things.
Yeah.
And I would just quickly say, I put my pants on like everybody else puts their pants on. And money is an issue with me as it is with anyone else. And it's another barometer of the way that I have to figure out, am I going to trust God or not?
Absolutely.
And I do struggle. And so, and it directly relates to the overall church's budget, because that's where the church's budget comes from, is partially from my own tithing, my own giving.
Yeah, it is a struggle. So let's switch topics a little bit, and let's talk about some pastoral issues in regard to the budget.
Let's don't do that.
Okay. Then let's definitely do that. Let's definitely do that. So here's a great question. How does a church figure out what a pastor should be paid?
My grandmother believed when I first went into the ministry that everything that went into the offering plate went to me. She did. She thought everything that went into the offering plate, that was mine.
Yeah.
And I had to explain to her that's not the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, that's not the way it works. And secondly, I don't set my own salary. I never did. Even when the church first started, I never set my own salary. You don't set your salary.
Right.
And
let us say, if there is a church out there where the pastor is setting his own salary, that's wrong.
Yeah, it is. It is for multiple reasons. I mean, not only do I not set my own salary, I don't have any control of any money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if people give me money, I'm now uncomfortable. I want that money to either be in an offering plate or given to somebody else. I don't want that money in my hand. As fast as I can get that money out of my hands, the better.
Yeah.
So, our elders and a finance team sets salaries here in the church. And it's been a similar situation ever since the church started.
Yeah, and let's add to that. Now, not only should pastors not set their salary, if your church is out there and that pastor is handling large amounts of money, you're setting your church up for problems, at least in minimum, the accusation of what happens when money enters the hand of pastoral staff. It's a huge problem.
And we should run away from all appearance of evil.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's an example of it.
Yeah. There's never been a pastor that's mismanaged money, ever. So, should a church criticize how a pastor spends his salary?
Well, I saw that question coming, and I think that the answer to that is probably not, but to the same degree, if there's I think of some of these pastors who bought planes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think they set themselves up to be criticized.
Yeah.
I don't have a plane. Do you?
Not that you know about.
I mean, you. But the average pastor that I know, they're not out there buying planes. And if they want to, go to Louisville and go to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and someone in the church hears about it, that's up to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the answer to that should be no. People should not criticize them for how they spend their money. To the same degree, we as pastors are to always remember that we are representatives of the Lord like everyone else.
Right. I think the criticism comes along when we talk about people who are attached to the prosperity gospel, which really is an aberrant version of Christianity, which holds that if you are financially blessed, it's because God is looking favorably on your life. And if you are not financially blessed, it's because you have sin in your life that you need to repent of, and you need to pray harder, serve more, and to get more in line with God's will for your life. And by the way, the church can help with that in these prosperity churches. And that point of view is totally unbiblical, because the Bible is very clear. The rain falls the same on the just and the unjust, that God blesses both righteous people and unrighteous people, that there's common grace to all. And there's going to be people in this life that are totally wicked and they're rich. And then there's going to be saints of God who are totally impoverished. The financial blessing of God has nothing to do with one's Christian personal life, walk with Christ.
Yes, and all who desire to live a godly life will suffer persecution.
Yeah.
And so it's, to that degree, that's an exact opposite statement to the prosperity gospel. I mean, if you follow Jesus, you're going to experience pain, not blessing.
Yeah.
Now, is there blessing? Yes, but not without some pain.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that is rejected as well.
Yeah. Have you been following, or do you know about, I know you're not on Instagram, but have you heard about the Instagram page Preachers and Sneakers?
No.
And so it's an Instagram page where they take photos of pastors and what sneakers they're wearing, and then they'll look up online on eBay or some price charts that are out there how much their sneakers cost. And I was looking at it the other day, and there's like a prosperity preacher. He's got $1,000 sneakers that he's wearing in the pulpit and wearing Gucci stuff. And
I bought some last Saturday at Shoe Carnival for $39.99. Just so you know.
You'll never make it to that page, Bobby. You need to do better. We need to make, no, we don't need to make preachers and sneakers. What protections do we put in place to make sure there's no mismanagement of church money?
Well, I mean, there's multiple people counting the money. Pastors are not part of that list.
Yeah.
The new budget that's being presented to the church has an audit in it. The goal for Northwoods is that it's audited every 3 years. From an outside firm. And so most churches don't do that.
True.
And so, the way we handle funds, it themselves is very carefully. And then, they're double signers of checks. So there are multiple ways that we do in order to keep you and I and the church safe from mismanagement.
Yeah, and if you're not a Northwoods church listener, I think a good thing to do is go back and ask your church, what protections do you have in place? Because your church should have some protections in place, not only for the pastor's safety, but just for the church's safety.
And I think this goes a little bit to an earlier question, but I think one of the things that I just sort of struggle with annually, that I think is a good, healthy struggle concerning our budget, is always looking after the budget is set and asking, okay, how much of this budget is being used for the sake of mission? How much of this in any way can we say is being, and if I'm able to look and say, okay, more this year than last year, that's a win.
Yeah.
Because that should be the goal. The goal should be that every year we're putting more and more funds towards mission and putting some sort of a direct relation to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing.
One common criticism of some pastors is that they pay too much attention to money, or they preach too much on money. Is that criticism valid?
For some people. I think for some people, they do spend way too much time talking about money. And for some people, that's all they think about as pastors. And I think that's a mistake. I don't say this arrogantly. I don't think we do.
Because we preach expositionally through books of the Bible. So whatever's the topic is the topic.
That's right. I mean, I'm whatever's next is next. And so I don't think we talk about money very much at all.
Right.
Other than when it's up. But when it's up, it's going to be the main topic of the day.
Yeah, I think it helps us to preach expositionally, because in some churches, when the pastor preaches the money sermon, you know that giving is down. Right. I mean, those things are they're connected.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that there sometimes there is a deserved criticism of churches that's what they talk about.
Right.
We need to be in a situation where we are talking about it in connection with discipleship. When it's in connection with discipleship, we recognize that as you grow in Christ, your giving to Christ through the local church is directly connected.
Yeah.
So I desire to see people grow in Christ. I desire to see people give, not because we desire to see offerings rise. We desire to see people grow in Christ.
Yeah, and what, on the other hand, we're going to talk about red letter Christianity in another podcast. But if you do look at the red letters of Jesus, and one of the topics that he talks about most is money.
Yep.
It's money. And I think it's well deserved that we as Christians do talk about money. And I feel like some of the criticism comes against churches, quote unquote, talking too much about money, is people get uncomfortable when we talk about money, because it's an area where we as Americans just generally don't do well. That we can be more generous, that we can be more giving, we can be less selfish. And our culture is out there telling us we need to be selfish. We need to have 3 cars and a boat mortgage. do we necessarily need these things?
Now, the Christmas season is here.
Yeah.
And as the Christmas season is here and we're thinking about where we are financially, we are in the season of stuff.
Yeah.
And as we're in the season of stuff, maybe we should be thinking more about not what do I get, but this year, how can I help somebody?
Mm.
You know, how can I be a blessing? How can I give more? What can I give for the sake and the cause of Christ? And I think whenever we do that, Christ always blesses the giver. And I don't mean that in the sense of the prosperity gospel. I mean that in the sense of that there is a truth to that it's not about I give 5 and I get 50. It's about I give 5, I get more than 50. Not in dollars, but in recognizing his care, his love, his provision, and he blesses that.
Yeah.
And I do need to be obedient to that.
Yeah, and I know when the Bible talks about storing up treasures in heaven, I think whenever we give generously to a charitable cause or to the church or to somebody in need, I mean, that is the very definition of spending our money to store up treasures in heaven. And then I think Christ smiles down at us for when we do those things. Well, thanks for joining us today, Bobby. I hope that this has been a scintillating conversation.
The hour is over.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go buy myself some $500 sneakers, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Northwoods Church podcast. If you'd like some more information on our ministry at Northwoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, please visit us online at www.northwoodschurch.org. Again, that's www.northwoodschurch.org. We'll see you next time.